Hi, my name is Adam Shoemaker, and I'm rector at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Charleston. And I'm happy today to have with me Chase Glenn, who is the executive director of the Alliance for Full Acceptance, and Brandon Fish, who is the director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Charleston, who are both steering members of the Stamp Out Hate Coalition. We're here today to talk about that and about that effort. Thank you so much for making the time for this conversation. And I wonder if you each could speak a little bit about Stamp Out Hate, about how it got started and what its aims are.
You know, I think in South Carolina and in the United States, we have not been strangers to very public, very traumatic hate crimes that have occurred, especially in the forms of mass shootings over the past several years. And I think those effects have been felt throughout all of our communities that are typically targeted by hate, but especially here in South Carolina, where we had the Mother Emanuel AME church shooting. And, we all come together as a community in the wake of these tragedies. And I think, after the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh, we also had an interfaith vigil and an intercommunity vigil. And then, there was a string of anti-Semitic attacks at the end of last year that had our Jewish community asking us, how can we stand in solidarity with those people who are being attacked? And also we had our partners from throughout the community, like Chase Glenn at AFA, Mother Emanuel Church, your church, all these organizations that said, how can we stand with the Jewish community at this time? And we kind of decided after that moment where we all came together, why don't we come together instead of in sadness, come together to do something positive that can make an impact to counteract some of these things that are occurring here in South Carolina. And so we had this big rally at the beginning of the year called No Hate, No Fear. And we brought together government officials of every level and people from all faiths, races, and backgrounds to basically stand together and call for hate crime legislation in South Carolina. This is an issue that we've been thinking about and working on for a while, but this is the first time that we are getting together as a state, all of our organizations, all of our faith communities to kind of speak with one voice that it's long past time to get this done. We really started to plan out like a campaign, a pre-COVID age campaign with a lot of physical meetings involved, and the state legislature was still meeting before COVID hit, and then COVID hit, and really everything was on the back burner for the state legislature except for getting COVID resources to people, and also gave us a chance to rethink what kind of legislation we wanted, to really plan out a support campaign that we didn't have in place before we started this effort to begin with, and just reimagine what we're doing. And so that's where we're at right now. We're building support. We've garnered the support of organizations and faith communities across the state, and pretty soon we'll be utilizing that support as we switch gears into advocacy mode with the legislature starting again.
Chase, do you want to talk about how you got involved in this effort?
Sure, absolutely. And echo much of what Brandon said already. The LGBTQ community in particular is a highly targeted group, part of a marginalized community. And especially when you start, intersecting different types of identities, whether it's race, religion, ability, then we see members of our community targeted even higher levels. And, here in South Carolina, we know the trans community has been victims of multiple attacks, several, 3 murders within the last 2 years, and, other sort of attacks downtown. Even we saw, an altercation down there where a woman was targeted because of her trans identity. And obviously, similar to what Brandon said, you can sit back and you can have vigils, and you can, have services to memorialize people, and those are important and good, of course, to have those moments as a community. But, after that fades away, where are we? And we know that we need to to be proactive in our work to finally get this across the line and get a hate crime law passed. So that's why I'm excited to be a part of the coalition, because it feels so much more productive and a lot more hopeful when you're a part of a broad group of organizations that represent all different types of identities and orientations and connections, and it helps me feel like, okay, we're doing something, and I feel really hopeful that this is going to be the time that we're going to get a law passed.
Now, Brandon, we do have a hate crime ordinance in Charleston. Is that correct? And I believe Columbia also has one. I feel like I was reading about that this morning in the Post and Courier. Can you speak a little bit about the municipal ordinances that exist vis-a-vis what's trying to be achieved at the state level?
So absolutely. So, we have different kinds of laws as a society. We have federal laws and state laws and municipal laws. And municipal laws generally cover lighter offenses. So first of all, I want to give a lot of credit to Chase and AFA. Before I worked at Federation, Chase and AFA and my predecessors were working on getting this city ordinance passed with the help of the Anti-Defamation League. And big credit to the city of Charleston for getting this done. They've also passed a resolution in support of state hate crime legislation. But we currently have hate crime ordinances, local ones on the books here in Columbia and I think in Greenville. And these are great ordinances. Basically, the way that they work is if you violate a city crime and you do so, with the intention of targeting somebody because of who they are, they can tack on this extra ordinance to make the charge a little bit more severe and also track the crime as a hate crime. It's great for lower level offenses, but as soon as we get into offenses that are state law offenses like aggravated assault or murder or anything like that, that falls outside of the city ordinance. And as we all know, as low country residents, we also have to deal with the fact that we're an area with lots of different municipalities: Charleston, James Island, North Charleston, Mount Pleasant, Hanahan, Folly Beach. These are all different municipalities. So it has a limited scope what it can do, and I think that's why the city has proactively passed this resolution asking for a state law. So we've seen it enforced in Charleston a bit. Last week there was an unfortunate incident where an LGBTQ man was targeted downtown. Somebody pulled a gun on him and used anti-LGBTQ slurs. The city investigated that under their hate crime ordinance. But if that had been an assault, or if it had happened in a place that wasn't within the city of Charleston boundaries, it wouldn't be recognized as such. And also as a state, we really are missing the tracking function that happens when you have a state ordinance. If we have mandatory reporting as we're recommending, if we have law enforcement training, we're able to look at the state and track as a state what the trends in hate crime are, where they're occurring. And also as a nation, we have statistics. Right now, South Carolina is a black hole for hate crime statistics because we don't have any of those kinds of that kind of infrastructure in place. And it also means that we don't get the resources from organizations like the Human Rights Campaign or ADL or some of these national organizations that deal with hate crime because we're not able to give them the data that they're looking for in order to justify allocating resources in our areas.
I think that's a really good point what Brandon brought up about this law is not just about, our ideal version of law, I should say that. There isn't a bill that's been filed yet. But this isn't just about, okay, this is a crime. Someone was targeted because they're Jewish or targeted because they're Black or they're gay. But there's multi facets to the ideal bill in our mind, which includes, like Brandon said, the mandatory reporting, the training of law enforcement, because there's lots of different things that go into making this a successful bill that we're hoping to see.
I wonder why you both feel like South Carolina has not gotten there yet. to me, this feels like such an obvious kind of bill that one would think elected officials would easily support. I mean, what has been the opposition to something like this?
I'll let Chase take that one.
Oh, sure. Put me out on the line. I mean, I think misinformation, and that's a lot of times why we don't get a lot of different sort of important things passed and move along. Misinformation, fake news. People think that, you have a hate crime law, it's going to impinge on freedom of speech, that somehow, a minister isn't going to be able to say something that aligns with their faith from a pulpit. If you have a hate crime law, because that impinges on their freedom of speech, which is false. Unless there is a direct connection between what someone says and it initiating a hate crime, it doesn't affect your freedom of speech. That, I mean, and Brandon may be able to speak to this, but a lot of times it's misinformation like that that causes people to pause. And really, if that's probably the number one, the freedom of speech argument is the number one argument that I hear as far as why people are afraid to pass something like this. The other one they say is, well, we have a federal hate crime law. Why do we need one in this state? Or the opposite direction, we have an ordinance, which is, we've already proven that is not a good comparison to an actual state law. But why do we need this? And Brandon always speaks really eloquently about why we need this. So if he wants to chime in, that's great. But, those are probably the two big things: freedom of speech concerns and why is this really needed? Which we can say it is needed, and it's not going to affect what you're able to say out in public unless you're being directly, inciting violence against someone because of who they are, which is not okay.
Brandon, do you have anything to add to that?
Chase didn't say it, but I will. I think that also there's lingering prejudice against certain groups of people. I think especially when we get into issues of gender identity and trans people, I think there are some legislators that have a hard time wrapping their head around that and going back to their constituents and talking about it in a way that they feel comfortable. And it's something that we need to get over as a state. I think something that Chase can affirm is that, getting into this coalition, I think everybody involved, when they signed this position statement, they were very clear that we're advocating for a bill that protects everybody, not just some groups of people. And that's going to make it a little bit more difficult for us to get to the finish line. But we feel that that's of the utmost importance, because not just because we need to include everybody, but even for our own communities. As Chase alluded to earlier, in terms of intersectionality, we've got members of our Jewish community who are LGBTQ, Black, from a different country. All these categories fit into each other. So, it's important for us to have a law that protects our entire community, and that's sometimes a sticking point for people.
Well, and to me, that lifts up the importance of a coalition that includes faith communities. I mean, every time the Charleston Pride comes around, I speak to my folks about how churches, I think, are some of the most subversive participants in the Pride Parade, because the inclusion of faith communities strikes back, in my mind, on some of the reasons that people who resist legislation like this would argue we shouldn't be supporting it. And so I think it's important to have faith communities involved. And I would assume, am I correct in assuming that this coalition is continuing to grow and continuing to add members? Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's our goal, is to get as many supporting organizations involved and individuals as well, especially leading up to the beginning of the legislative session, and that's in January, where we really want to hit the ground running. and having as much sort of broad support across the board. And, and I'll just say, like you said, the faith element is key to our success. Here in the state of South Carolina, we know that religion and politics are a lot of times pretty enmeshed, for good or bad, right? And having this broad group of support of all different faiths is really key, I think, to our success. Because, like you said, you can have conversations as a minister and have impact as an ally in a way that maybe I can't, right? I walk into the room as a trans person. There are a number of people, for any number of reasons, that just sort of turn me off. They're like, yeah, not going to listen to him. He has an agenda, or he has issues, mental health, whatever, fill in the blank. So having our faith community, and all different types of faith, is so key, I think, to the success of this work.
So the legislature comes back in January. What happens then? I mean, where do things stand, and how do you see things unfolding as we move into early 2021? Brandon, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. Well, our governor convened a subcommittee to address criminal justice reform, and one of their big projects is this hate crime legislation. They met a couple of times leading up to the legislative session. I know they're working really hard on language for a bill. We would expect that would be pre-filed before the legislative session, but it could be filed sometime after the legislative session begins if they continue to kind of fine tune it. That would then go to a judiciary committee, where they get a chance to fine tune it, and if they vote on it and wave it through, it can come to the floor at some point for a debate and a vote. And really the biggest danger in this whole process is that pieces of the bill that are really important get taken out. And a lot of times people don't understand why each part of what we're asking for in the bill is really important. As we discussed earlier, I think it's really important we protect everybody that's in danger through this process. It's easier to pass a bill that doesn't protect everybody, and sometimes people just want to get things done. So we have to be really vigilant about that. And then also these other pieces that people tend to forget, like this law enforcement training. I think maybe the article that you were reading about the Columbia hate crime ordinance was about how it has been enforced in ways that some people feel it wasn't designed to enforce. We have to remember that we have a criminal justice system that's in need of systemic reforms, and unless we're very good about training how to enforce certain laws, they may not be enforced the way that we intend them to be enforced. So it's really important to give police officers tools they need to recognize what a hate crime is. And then this tracking piece also gets left out sometimes. People don't. A lot of times our state legislature will pass mandates that are unfunded, and so there's a real aversion to there's a real fear of passing anything that requires any government agency to do anything that it's not already doing. But we have to be really vigilant to make sure that as we go throughout this process, that we as a coalition are really unified and speaking in one voice for what we want and what we don't want. So, we have to be dynamic and agile. And, it's tough. It's tough to come out and say, we want a law that protects everybody. And if you take out this person, as all these other communities that are protected in this bill, we're not going to stand with this bill. It's tough to take that position, but that's one that we really want to take. And I think the more we build our coalition, the more communities that are represented, and the more those organizations can mobilize their communities, the more effective we'll be in doing that.
I know that our police chief in Charleston, as I understand it, is supportive of this effort. Are you aware of where things, what about other law enforcement across the state? I mean, is Charleston an outlier, or is there other municipalities in the state that are backing this as well?
Absolutely. We have, we know that as far as, law enforcement, Sheriff Lott in Richland County up in Columbia, very supportive, vocal, supporter of a hate crime law. There is definitely other law enforcement that is supportive. Those are the Chief Reynolds and Sheriff Lott are the two sort of big ones that we know are supportive. We're in conversations with the Police Chiefs Association. We know generally we have support. Don't necessarily have the names, signed on the dotted line, but law enforcement is supportive of this, and Chief Reynolds is an amazing ally in this particular regard. He is a champion of the need for a hate crime law. He understands the different facets of the law that we've been talking about here, why it's needed. And so we're hopeful that he will be someone who will be able to speak truth to power up there at the State House and really help us make this happen.
Yeah, and because this legislation gives law enforcement more tools, right, to be able to do their job in their communities. St. Stephen's has formally signed on to the coalition, but I wonder beyond that, what can we do? What can our membership do if they want to be actively involved in this effort? How can people be supportive of this effort moving forward? Do you want to start, Brandon?
Sure. I think there are plenty of different ways to be involved. As we shift gears towards advocacy mode, we're going to have a tool on our website for you to send an email out to, and it'll be very easy. It'll automatically choose who your legislators are for you, or who the Judiciary Committee is, if that's who we're targeting at the moment. We really have been lent some great technology by the Anti-Defamation League for that. So there's going to be a time to really call out to everybody that we can reach and say, now it's time to mobilize. The most important thing we can be doing now, I think, is exploiting our networks, taking advantage of the connections that we have. There are a lot of people at St. Stephen's, there are a lot of people in the Jewish community or in the LGBTQ community that have connections to different organizations, different businesses. Encouraging as many of them to sign on as possible is a fantastic way to be supportive right now. And I don't want to jump the gun, but at some point we're going to be looking to hire a lobbyist, and that's going to require some funding, and it will take some fundraising to get there. Even though we haven't formally started a fundraising campaign, I'm sure I'm leaving some things out.
Yeah, I would just say, for individuals who want to make sure they're in the know, there is an opportunity on our website to go ahead and at least sign on as an individual so you can get updates. So that's a good next step. You'll be put on our mailing list. And when we really do activate, and we need to activate the group, if you're on the list, you're going to be, in that communication stream from the beginning.
And can you just tell us what the website is for people listening in?
Sure, it's stampoutHate.sc, which is different, but that is easy to remember that way. StampoutHate.sc.
Right. Well, Brandon and Chase, I really appreciate the time that you've given me and appreciate your effort on behalf of our community here in Charleston and on behalf of so many others across the state. Thanks for all that you're doing. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Take care.
You too.
Bye.